Right now, millions of people are walking around carrying invisible chains. Chains that nobody else can see. Chains made of shame and silent guilt. These aren't just feelings that come and go. These are psychological parasites that rewire your brain after trauma and convince you that you're fundamentally broken. And here's what nobody tells you. The trauma itself isn't what destroys your self-esteem. It's what happens after. It's the shame that whispers you deserved it. It's the guilt that screams you could have stopped it. Today, we're tearing down the walls around the most painful emotions human beings can experience, and I'm going to show you exactly how they're sabotaging your life right now. Let me ask you something. Have you ever felt like you're wearing a mask? Like there's a version of you that everyone sees, and then there's the real you, the one drowning in feelings you can't explain to anyone? That's not weakness. That's shame doing exactly what it was designed to do. Keep you silent. Keep you isolated. Keep you believing that if people knew the real you, they'd walk away. Trauma breaks something fundamental inside us. But what most people don't understand is that the breaking isn't the worst part. The worst part is what grows in the cracks afterward. Shame and guilt move into those broken spaces like squatters, and they start rewriting your story. They take the worst moment of your life and turn it into your identity. Here's the brutal truth. When something traumatic happens, your brain goes into survival mode. It's trying to make sense of the senseless. It's searching for control in chaos. And here's where it gets twisted. Your brain would rather blame you than accept that bad things happen randomly. Because if you're to blame, that means you had control. And if you had control, that means you can prevent it from happening again. So your mind creates this narrative: it was your fault. You should have known. You should have done something. You should have been different. This is where shame takes root. Shame isn't about what you did. Guilt is about what you did. Shame is about who you are. Guilt says I made a mistake. Shame says I am the mistake. And after trauma, shame becomes your new identity. You stop being a person who experienced something terrible. You become a terrible person who experienced what you deserved. Let me paint a picture for you. Imagine a woman who survived assault. She didn't fight back. Not because she didn't want to, but because her nervous system shut down. It's called tonic immobility, a biological freeze response that happens when fight or flight aren't options. But here's what shame tells her every single day: you didn't fight back, so you must have wanted it. You froze, so you're weak. You survived, so you're dirty. These aren't rational thoughts. These are shame's weapons. And they're so effective because they operate below conscious awareness. You don't even realize you're thinking them until they've already destroyed your self-worth. Research from Brené Brown and trauma specialists like Bessel van der Kolk shows us something horrifying. Shame activates the same neural pathways as physical pain. When you feel shame, your brain is literally experiencing the psychological equivalent of being stabbed. And unlike physical wounds that heal, shame wounds stay open because we keep them hidden. We never let light touch them. We never let anyone help us dress them. Now here's where it gets even darker. Shame loves company, and its best friend is silent guilt. This isn't the guilt you feel when you actually do something wrong. This is irrational, survivor's guilt. It's the guilt that asks, why did I survive when others didn't? Why wasn't I strong enough to stop it? Why didn't I see it coming? Silent guilt is particularly insidious because it makes no logical sense, which means you can't logic your way out of it. You're trapped in an emotional prison where the only crime you committed was surviving. Let me share something that might crack your chest open. Studies of Holocaust survivors, war veterans, and abuse survivors reveal the same pattern. The people who survived often carry more psychological damage than we can measure, not from what happened to them, but from the guilt of surviving it. There's a man, let's call him Marcus. He survived a car accident that killed his best friend. He was driving. It wasn't his fault. A drunk driver hit them. But every single day for 7 years, Marcus woke up thinking, I should have taken a different route. I should have left 5 minutes earlier. I should be dead instead of him. This is silent guilt. It doesn't care about facts. It only cares about finding a reason, any reason, to make you responsible for the uncontrollable. And here's the question nobody wants to answer. Why do we do this to ourselves? Why does our brain create guilt where none should exist? The answer is both simple and devastating. Because guilt gives us the illusion of control. If it was your fault, then the world makes sense. If it was random, then you're vulnerable. Your brain would rather hurt you than admit you're not in control. Drop a comment right now if you've ever felt guilty for something that wasn't your fault. Because I need you to know you're not alone in this. This is one of the most common and least talked about effects of trauma. Now let's talk about what shame and guilt do to your self-esteem once they've moved in. They don't just sit there quietly. They metastasize. They spread into every corner of your life. You start avoiding social situations because you're convinced people can see your brokenness. You sabotage relationships because you believe you don't deserve love. You reject opportunities because shame has convinced you that you're an imposter waiting to be exposed. This is called the shame spiral. One trigger, one reminder of your trauma, and suddenly you're not just feeling bad about one thing. You're feeling bad about everything. You're inadequate as a partner. You're a failure at work. You're a burden to your friends. You're worthless as a human being. And the worst part? You believe it's all true. Self-esteem doesn't just take a hit after trauma. It gets systematically dismantled. Because shame rewrites your core beliefs about yourself. Before trauma, you might have believed I'm worthy of love. After shame takes hold, that belief becomes I'm too damaged to be loved. Before trauma, I'm capable. After shame, I'm helpless. Before trauma, I belong. After shame, I'm an outsider pretending to be normal. These aren't surface-level insecurities. These are foundational cracks in how you see yourself. And every day you carry shame and guilt without addressing them, those cracks get wider. Here's something that might surprise you. Research shows that people with low self-esteem after trauma don't actually see themselves accurately. They see themselves through a distorted lens that magnifies flaws and erases strengths. It's like looking in a funhouse mirror that only shows your worst angles. You're not objectively broken. But shame has convinced you that you are. Let me give you an example. A survivor of childhood abuse grows up believing she's unlovable. Not because she is, but because shame told her that what happened was her fault, and people who deserve abuse don't deserve love. Fast forward 20 years. She's successful, kind, intelligent, surrounded by people who care about her. But she can't accept their love. Every compliment feels like a lie. Every gesture of affection feels like pity. Because her self-esteem isn't based on reality. It's based on shame's narrative. This is the cage that trauma survivors live in. The bars are made of shame. The lock is made of guilt. And the key is something most people never find because they don't even know they're imprisoned. Now I want to talk about the cycle because understanding this might be the most important thing you take away from this video. Shame and guilt don't just damage your self-esteem. They create behaviors that reinforce the damage. It works like this. Shame makes you feel unworthy, so you isolate yourself. Isolation confirms that you're unlovable. That confirmation deepens the shame. Deeper shame leads to more isolation. Round and round. Or here's another version. Guilt makes you feel responsible for things outside your control, so you overcompensate. You become a people pleaser. You sacrifice your needs to fix everyone else's problems. You burn yourself out trying to earn redemption for a crime you never committed. And when you inevitably fail to save everyone, guilt says, see, you're not good enough. You should have tried harder. So you try harder. And the cycle continues. These patterns are self-perpetuating. They're designed to keep you trapped. And the cruelest part? You usually don't recognize them as patterns. You just think this is who you are. Broken. Flawed. Less than. But here's the truth that shame doesn't want you to know. You're not broken. You're injured. And there's a difference. Broken things can't be fixed. Injured things can heal. If you're still watching, leave a comment saying I'm ready to heal, because that acknowledgement is the first crack in shame's armor. So how do we break this? How do we reclaim self-esteem from the jaws of shame and guilt? First, we have to understand that you cannot shame yourself into healing. You cannot guilt yourself into being better. Those strategies don't work. They never have. They're the emotional equivalent of trying to dig yourself out of a hole. The science is clear on this. Shame thrives in secrecy. The only way to disarm it is to expose it to light. That means talking about it. Not to everyone, not on social media, but to someone safe. A therapist trained in trauma. A support group of fellow survivors. A trusted friend who can hold space without judgment. When you speak shame out loud, something powerful happens. You realize it's not as big as it felt in your head. You realize other people have felt it too. You realize that the story shame told you about being uniquely damaged isn't true. You're not alone. You're not an exception. You're a human being responding to trauma exactly the way human beings respond to trauma. Research from trauma therapy models like EMDR and somatic experiencing shows that shame can't survive in the presence of compassion. When you treat yourself with the same kindness you'd offer a friend, shame starts to dissolve. Not overnight. Not easily. But consistently. Here's a practice that changes lives. When shame shows up, instead of believing it, interrogate it. Ask, is this feeling based on facts or on fear? Did I actually do something wrong, or am I blaming myself for something I couldn't control? Would I say these things to someone I love? Usually the answer is no. You wouldn't tell your best friend they're worthless because of what happened to them. So why are you saying it to yourself? This is called self-compassion, and it's not about letting yourself off the hook. It's about recognizing that you've been carrying a weight that was never yours to carry. Now let's address silent guilt. The guilt that says you should have done something different. Here's the hard truth. You did the best you could with the information, resources, and nervous system you had in that moment. Hindsight is 20/20, but trauma doesn't happen in hindsight. It happens in real time, in chaos, in terror. You survived. That's not something to feel guilty about. That's something to honor. One of the most powerful exercises for releasing survivor's guilt comes from narrative therapy. Write a letter to your past self, the one who went through the trauma. Tell them what you wish someone had told you. Tell them they're not to blame. Tell them survival was enough. Tell them they're worthy of peace. This might sound simple, but it's profound. Because when you extend compassion to your past self, you're also extending it to your present self. You're breaking the narrative that you're damaged goods. Another critical piece is understanding that healing trauma isn't about erasing what happened. It's about changing your relationship to what happened. The event doesn't define you. Your response to the event doesn't define you. You are not the worst day of your life. You are every day that came after, every moment you chose to keep going, every breath you took when giving up felt easier. Neuroscience tells us that the brain is plastic. It can change. It can rewire. The pathways that shame carved into your mind can be replaced with new pathways. Pathways of self-worth. Pathways of resilience. But this requires repetition. It requires practice. It requires you to actively challenge shame every time it speaks. Here's what that looks like in practice. Shame says you're unlovable. You respond, I am worthy of love and I'm learning to believe it. Guilt says you should have done more. You respond, I did what I could and I release what I couldn't control. Shame says you're broken. You respond, I'm healing and healing is not linear. These affirmations aren't magic spells. They're not going to cure trauma overnight. But they are tools. And tools, when used consistently, build new structures. I also want to talk about the power of reclaiming your story. Shame wants you to believe that your trauma is the only story worth telling about you. But that's a lie. You are not one story. You're 1,000 stories. Stories of strength. Stories of kindness. Stories of survival. Stories of small victories that no one else saw. Start collecting evidence of your worth. Write down moments when you were brave. Times when you helped someone. Days when you got out of bed even though every cell in your body wanted to stay under the covers. These aren't small things. These are proof that shame is wrong about you. And finally, let's talk about community. One of shame's greatest weapons is making you feel isolated. Like you're the only one carrying this weight. But you're not. There are millions of trauma survivors who understand exactly what you're going through. Finding your people, whether in person or online, whether in therapy groups or survivor networks, can be life-changing. When you see someone else sharing their shame and guilt and you feel compassion for them, something clicks. You realize that if you don't judge them for their pain, maybe your pain isn't as shameful as you thought. Maybe you deserve the same compassion you so freely give to others. Here's the bottom line. Shame and silent guilt are liars. They tell you that you're broken beyond repair. They tell you that your trauma defines you. They tell you that low self-esteem is your permanent reality. But none of that is true. You're not broken. You're not defined by your worst moments. And your self-esteem can be rebuilt. It won't happen overnight. Healing never does. But every day that you choose to challenge shame, every moment that you treat yourself with compassion, every time that you speak your truth instead of hiding it, you're taking back power. You're rewriting the narrative. You're becoming the author of your own story instead of letting trauma write it for you. So if you're watching this and you recognize yourself in these words, I need you to hear this. What happened to you was not your fault. The shame you carry is not yours to keep. The guilt you feel is not based in reality. You are worthy of healing. You are worthy of peace. You are worthy of a life where trauma is something that happened, not something that defines everything. If this video resonated with you, hit that like button and subscribe because we're building a community of people who refuse to let shame win. Drop a comment sharing one thing you're letting go of today. It doesn't have to be your full story. It can be as simple as I'm letting go of the belief that I'm not enough. Because that act of sharing, that act of breaking silence, is how we take power back from shame. Your self-esteem isn't gone. It's buried under layers of shame and guilt. But it's still there. And with time, with compassion, with community, you can uncover it again. You can remember who you were before trauma told you who to be. And more importantly, you can discover who you're becoming now. Someone stronger. Someone wiser. Someone who refused to let the worst day define all the days that followed. Thank you for watching. Thank you for being here. Thank you for choosing to heal. I'll see you in the next video.